I'm Jordana Arkin. I was a writer on What's New, Scooby-Doo, and you're listening to a podcast named Scooby-Doo.
Yeah!
The gang's all here, they're on the case, and there's no ghost that they wouldn't face, 'cause they dig it, Scooby-Doo. Yeah, they dig it, Scooby-Doo.
Hey gang, and welcome to another episode of a podcast named Scooby-Doo, the show that attempts to unravel 50 years of mysteries, meddling kids, and masked villains. My name is Mike Josic, and I'll be your guide through all things ghostly and groovy as I investigate every angle of every mystery and beyond. So grab yourself some Scooby snacks, fire up the mystery machine, and let's start the show.
Those robots seem to be operating on some hidden power source. You think we can locate it, Zuck? All right, let's go!
So we are back again for another interview in the Scooby-Doo Hanna-Barbera universe, and I am thrilled to be presenting to you guys a conversation that I recently had with Future Quest and Future Quest Presents artist Aaron Lopresti. Now, if you're not familiar with Aaron, he is a cartoonist who has been working for the better part of 20 years. He first made his mark on a Malibu title called Sludge, which, if any of you were around at the time, was kind of a Muck Monster type comic book, and has since gone on to work for both Marvel and DC, working on books like X-Men, Wonder Woman, and the aforementioned Future Quest and Future Quest Presents for DC Hanna-Barbera. Aaron also has a new project that he's been trying to get off the ground. During his time at DC, he worked on a serialized story called Garbage Man, which was included in a couple of their anthology series at the time. It was Weird Worlds and My Greatest Adventure. And that was part of a deal with DC where the rights to that character reverted back to Aaron. And there were supposed to be a couple of miniseries, and there's a lot of pages that were done or that just haven't kind of seen the light of day, and Aaron's quite proud of this work. I've seen and heard him say a couple times in my research that this is possibly the best artwork that he has done in the medium so far. He's very happy with it and wants to get it back in the world, so he, having the rights back, is now putting together a hardcover and is doing an Indiegogo campaign to raise funds to get this published and out into the world. So we talk about that a little bit at the end, but prior to that, we talk about his DC Hanna-Barbera work, working on those Future Quest books, and working with the Herculoids and his history with the Herculoids. I should also point out before we get into the conversation that this episode is a bit of an outlier in that, A, it is not Scooby specific. I'm back to covering the DC Hanna-Barbera stuff, so for those of you who don't love those digressions, my apologies, but this is just too fun for me. I just love these books too much to not have these conversations, and in my opinion, they're all part of the whole narrative, so I don't have to make apologies for myself. It's my podcast. I make the rules. The other way it's an outlier is that it is a one and done. It is a single part interview. We had a very limited time to talk, and we kind of mashed in as much as we could into that space. We had one digression where we talk a bit about John Carter and why nobody's done anything with the Johnny Quest IP up to this point, but we focus primarily on the Future Quest work and the Herculoids. But we mash it all into a very finite space. So with the release of this episode, the next episode will be a Scooby-specific interview, and I won't make you guys wait too long for that to come out. My last episode, the audio commentary with Victor Cook, was not that long ago, a couple weeks, and this is coming out, and probably in another week or two, I'm going to be having that next interview coming out as well. So I'm going to try and keep the content rolling. I'm going to try and keep stuff coming out because I kind of went on hiatus there in the summer, and I want to make up for it, and I want to get some of the stuff that I've been working on out there into the world and into your ear holes. So look forward to that. But until then, what you have to look forward to is my great conversation with Aaron. So without further ado, I'm not going to hold you up any longer. Let's get to that conversation. I hope you enjoy it, and as always, I will see you on the other side. So I'm sitting here with artist Aaron Lopresti, who contributed to the DC Hanna-Barbera series Future Quest, as well as Future Quest Presents, doing the Herculoids segments. Hello, Aaron. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. This is exciting to get to talk about some of the stuff that was my favorite cartoons when I was a kid growing up. I'm older than probably most of your listeners, because I was actually I didn't see them when they first came out, but when they were in their first wave of reruns around 1970 and 71 is when I first saw all the Hanna-Barbera stuff.
Now, I talked to Parker a little while ago, and he had said in our conversation that when the idea of the Herculoids came up, you were right in there saying, if this is happening, I'm doing it. When did you first hear about the Herculoids being included in the whole Future Quest project and how that all came together?
This all started way back when I first left Marvel and went over to DC, which was, my goodness, 8 or 9 years ago now. And I had just started on Wonder Woman, and we were at a show in Seattle, and it was kind of a big DC dinner, and I was talking to Dan DiDio, and he had mentioned that he was trying to get the license for all the Hanna-Barbera material from Warner Brothers.
Yeah, that's apparently something him and Jim Lee had been doing for a while before it actually happened, right?
Yeah, I don't know how many times it was on and off again, but like I said, this was 8 or 9 years ago, and the hang-up was at the time that they had packaged all the Looney Tunes stuff along with the Hanna-Barbera stuff, and you couldn't separate them, and Dan didn't want the Looney Tunes stuff. He just wanted the Hanna-Barbera stuff, so he was having a hard time making a deal with them. And I told him, I said, well, if you get this stuff, I want to do the Herculoids. And so that was kind of like our gentleman's agreement. And then here we are. I don't know how long ago that stuff came out. 2 years ago now, maybe?
Yeah.
So 6-7 years later, I think I was actually writing and drawing a Metamorpho miniseries when all this stuff finally went down. And so, when they started doing Future Quest, I was just livid because I wanted to do the book. But they had Doc Shanner was doing it and doing a fine job. But I kind of felt like, oh my gosh, that was my project. But at the timing, I was on doing something else at the time that it just worked out that way. But I was able to finagle a Herculoids cover off the first issue because they did a bunch of variants.
Yeah.
And then I want to say it was issue 3 that I think I split an issue with Steve Rude where he did like a Birdman story and I did a Herculoids story that sort of wasn't part, I'm not going to say it wasn't part of the Future Quest continuity. I'm trying to remember now because it was more of an origin story for the Herculoids. So it may have tied in loosely, but I think we were just kind of giving a fill-in issue for Doc so he could get caught up, I think is how that all came about.
Yeah, there were a number of artists that came in, like Craig Rousseau did the Impossibles, you did the Herculoids, Rude was on Birdman, and Ron Randall was in there also.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so the whole Future Quest thing is, as I was just really upset that I couldn't draw more of that stuff because I didn't know what their long-term plans were. But as it worked out, they spun it off to do the Future Quest Presents. And at that time, I think, everybody knew that if you're doing the Herculoids, they better call me. Or I'd be, I'd be throwing a fit. So I think it was Marie Javins actually got the book. And so she got in touch with me and said, hey, this is what we're doing. Do you want to do the Herculoids arc? And I'm like, yeah. So it wasn't until, we had agreed to do it way before we got there because I think that they weren't even close to, because I think it was 9, 10, and 11 were the issues I ended up doing in Future Quest Presents.
Yeah.
And so they weren't even close to that at that point. So I was kind of like biding my time, waiting. In fact, I think I did the Conan Wonder Woman book with Gail Simone. And it turned out that just when I finished that, I was able to walk right into the Herculoids. And I think before I did the Conan thing, I did the Marvin Martian Manhunter thing. So that was like one of my favorite years of drawing comics in my entire career because I got to do, the Marvin Martian thing. So I got to do a little Looney Tunes. I got to do this. I'm a big Barbarian fan. So to be able to do a Wonder Woman Conan book and then on top of that get to do the Herculoids, it was a pretty spectacular about 9 months in there, 9 or 10 months in there. So
I'm curious. You hear a lot about everybody who loves Johnny Quest and Birdman sometimes gets in their Space Ghost, but you don't hear a lot about the Herculoids. And I'm wondering, What was it about the Herculoids that hooked you as a kid? It's an odd show.
Well, it was, I was like everybody else. I loved Space Ghost, of course, but I'm trying to think now. When I first saw those, I was probably about 6, and around 1970 or 71, I had even at that age, I'd always been, and it was probably seeing like Frazetta paperbacks, covers, and things like that, because that was like really big at that time. Sword and Sorcery was, if you remember, Conan came out from Marvel in 1970, and they were really making their push for monsters and Sword and Sorcery books at that time to kind of, because superhero stuff was lagging sort of after the Silver Age, and I sort of grew up in that whole environment. So I kind of viewed Herculoids as this great combination of superheroes, but sort of sword and sorcery. And then I was always been a big monster fan as well. And so then you had all these big creatures in there, right, along with the team. And so it was kind of like this combination of elements that I liked every bit of it.
And there's the sci-fi elements as well.
Yeah, exactly. So it really combines every aspect of fantasy or imaginative storytelling that you could, all the different genres are like crammed into this one cartoon. So for some reason, that just sort of clicked for me. And that was always sort of my favorite, when the Johnny Quest show would come on, and then you'd get one or two of these, either Space Ghost or Birdman or Herculoids or something. I was always hoping it would be a Herculoids cartoon. Give me a Space Ghost and give me Herculoids, and I was, set. So it just appealed to all my natural likings or stuff that I'm naturally attracted to in terms of creative stuff. So that was it for me. You take that stuff that you experience as a kid and that you're really excited about as a kid, and it just stays with you, as you get older. And so, 40 some years later, when the opportunity came to actually draw it, you're like, yes, childhood.
That seems to be the reaction from quite a few people working on these books, where it's like a catharsis. It's getting to do these characters that they loved since they were very small.
Yes, exactly. And you never think at that time. I mean, obviously, when you're 7 or 8 years old, you're not sitting there thinking, "Oh, I'm going to be a comic book artist someday, or an animator, and I'm going to draw these things." And so that's not even. It doesn't even seem like something that would be a goal in your imagination at that point. You're just sort of taking it in as a little kid watching your Saturday morning cartoons. But it does stay with you. Stuff you grew up with, stays with you. My mom was a big Star Trek fan, and so as a little kid, we always watched Star Trek. So I was so connected to Star Trek that even when Star Wars came out, and I loved Star Wars, I would never choose Star Wars over Star Trek. Even now, I'm just, as much as I love the original first 2 movies anyway of Star Wars, if Star Wars was on and Star Trek was on, I would watch Star Trek. So that's stuff that you're exposed to when you're young, it just kind of stays with you.
I'm a dyed-in-the-wool Johnny Quest fan.
Yes.
And I haven't really dedicated much time, even when I was a kid. Actually, I didn't have much access to the adventure shows when I was a kid. Johnny Quest was something that came my way, but I'd heard about Space Ghost and I heard about Birdman, but like the Galaxy Trio and the Impossibles and Herculoids were not anything that was on my radar until much, much later. And then I had to kind of do a deep dive when I was getting into Future Quest, and I watched a little bit of Herculoids then, and I did a research watch of some Herculoids today and yesterday. And one thing that I noticed, I also reread the 3 issues he did with Rob Williams and the story with Parker in the Future Quest. And one thing that I noticed is there was a spaceship that was in one of the episodes. I think it was the pirate episode or something. And you have a very similar, almost exact spaceship in the Future Quest origin story. And I was wondering, was that a design element that you drew specifically from the show? Is that something that you went and did some research, or is that just something like from memory? Or
no, I actually went and researched it. I figured, it wasn't the ship I got. I'm trying to remember. It might have been, I can't remember if it was a Herculoids episode or if it was a Space Ghost episode. It was one of the alien ships from one of those 2 things. And I thought, since I'm doing this, I might as well do a little homage to the cartoon show and see if anybody is paying attention, which apparently you were. But yeah, that was a specific, I went in and researched that and found a ship. I might have tweaked it just a little bit, but the basic design was taken from an either Space Ghost or a Herculoids cartoon.
Knowing Hanna-Barbera, it could have been both.
Probably was.
I remember there's a Scooby-Doo episode with an alien, and then later there's another Scooby-Doo episode with an alien, and it's like the exact same UFO and the exact same animation.
Yeah, there was that great episode with it had the skull head in the spacesuit, the glowing skull head.
Oh, the space kook, yeah.
Yeah, and I think that ship was the same as like you said, there was another alien, and I think it was the same ship. But they were on a budget, so I had to get that stuff done, and they're on a deadline and a budget. So.
Oh yeah, the more I dive into like the history and talking to people who worked on the show and finding out like just the money they had and the time they had and the obstacles they were dealing with, it's like I have no bones about about their planned animation style.
You look back at it now and you just kind of go, it wasn't that great in some moments. But, you're getting back to Johnny Quest, which you brought up a little bit earlier. That show for me, I have all those episodes on DVD, and that show still holds up because as limited as they were in the animation they were doing, the design of the characters and they had that sort of, Doug Wildey did the designs for those. The Johnny Quest, and they had kind of a illustrative comic book feel to them. And even though, the movements and stuff were somewhat limited, and it still looked terrific to me. It was kind of like reading a comic that was actually moving,
Yeah.
And so I watched those today, and I still think they were well written and jam-packed with action. They had the great melodramatic music, and that was just a great cartoon, and it's amazing to me that they haven't been able to sort of recapture that feel in a more modern, either animated show. I know they tried I think in the 90s, or a live action movie or something would be terrific with that. I just don't know why they haven't either done it, or actually what they have tried hasn't really worked out that great.
I was actually a fan of that Real Adventures of Johnny Quest. I admired what they were trying to do there. But I have asked several people in the process of these conversations that I'm having, and I'm like, why hasn't this resurfaced? And there seems to be like this, people don't really want to talk about it, because I think there are things always in motion with this property, and it's just a matter of like the right people getting in line to just push it past that hump and just get it, into production, because you hear buzzes about Robert Rodriguez doing a movie, and like then it goes away. But
you heard about John Carter too, and that took forever and sadly didn't do well. But
what a great movie, though.
I know, I really like that movie. I think I'm not anti Taylor Kitsch, but I don't think he was the right choice for that. And I know originally I saw some production art from years ago, and they had originally were thinking of Hugh Jackman when he was younger, and he would have been terrific.
I could see that, yeah.
I just don't. Taylor Kitsch just didn't have enough screen charisma to really identify with, where someone like Hugh Jackman, I think, does. He's much more likable persona, and I think that would have helped the movie a lot, because it was a good movie. You can't sit there and look at that and say, okay, this movie sucks. It just didn't resonate with the audience, and for as much money as they spent on it, that's a bad combination. You spend $250 million on a movie and it doesn't resonate with the audience.
Well, that was one of those situations where they had there were executives changing over and marketing departments were being retasked, and it just fell by the wayside.
Well, and the marketing on it was horrific too.
Oh, I know. Back to Herculoids.
Yeah, I was going to say we've gone a little bit off.
I mentioned the spaceship. Was bringing design elements from the show into the comic book work, was that an important thing to you? And what other design challenges might you have faced while adapting this world?
Well, that was, when I did the Future Quest Presents story, and all of it took place on the home world, that was pretty easy, because it was basically, it's just a jungle planet, right? So But when I was doing the short story with Parker in the regular Future Quest, that was more difficult because you had to take the robot elements, and there was a lot of them in that story. And it was like you wanted to sort of capture that sort of flavor the original series had, the kind of corny goofball 60s versions of, Hanna-Barbera robots. But at the same time, you wanted it to kind of, maybe appeal to a more modern audience. And so that was really, and I'm not a great tech guy anyway, but I was looking at if I went like full manga tech and did something like that, it wouldn't even be recognizable to the fans of the cartoon show, right? And you got to assume that the majority of the people picking up those books were fans of the original cartoon show. Maybe there was some new readers coming in and were just being introduced to this stuff, but my guess is that most of the people picking that stuff up were fans of the show. So I wanted to maintain a feel of the original cartoon, but not have it be, so directly taken from the show that it felt corny, So it was kind of an interesting challenge trying to figure out how to approach that stuff. And I don't know if I was successful or not, but that's kind of what I ended up with, was kind of hopefully a better drawn version of the same stuff that was on the cartoon show, was kind of, I think, what it ended up being.
I dug your robots.
I mean, the robots I used in the Future Quest Presents at the very opening of the story, where Dorno and Zoc are chasing the robots, those I was more happy, I think, with those, because that to me was a closer amalgam of what I was trying to do in the first one, was this kind of retro robot that still sort of felt somewhat modern, and kind of putting both those things together. So I was happier with the robot, but I didn't have the restrictions on those robots as I did in the first one, because the first ones were, Jeff, when he wrote that story, was a lot of that stuff they had very specific, not necessarily physical descriptions, but what they were doing and what they were for. And so you sort of went, okay, this. Like, I think there was a robot in the foreground of one panel that was like pulling weeds out of the sidewalk. You know what I mean? So you're like, okay, how do I create a Hanna-Barbera robot for the purpose of pulling weeds? Where when I did Future Quest Presents, it was just robots. I could have done whatever I wanted, and which is what I did. But I tried to still give them sort of a retro feel along the way. So both stories had sort of different challenges to them, I guess,
right, in
that regard.
Did you get to see any style sheets or any kind of original design stuff from Hanna-Barbera?
No, I've got the that there's that big Toth book, right, that came out years ago. Okay, I had that, and so you could thumb through and sort of see the design, what designs were in there from that. But a lot of what I did was just, watch the cartoon shows on YouTube and stuff to kind of get myself back up to speed on what the characters look like and their outfits and all that. So that's mainly where I got my resource material.
Now, you kind of touched on this already a little bit, talking about working with Jeff on the Future Quest proper, but Jeff wrote Future Quest and Rob Williams wrote Future Quest Presents. So I was curious, what, if any, difference in dynamic between working with those two writers and working with those two projects, I guess. What was your experience with that?
Well, I don't know that I would say that maybe Jeff had a more pure sensibility or understanding of the property, maybe from the original cartoons. And I don't know Rob at all, so I don't know what his exposure to the show was prior. And nothing he wrote was out of character. I don't mean it like that. I had my issue with and this is strictly an art standpoint, because I thought the story was really good, but the Rob Williams stuff was so Dorno-centric. I didn't get to draw the rest of the Herculoids as much as I wanted to, Whereas I think Jeff was more dedicated in his, when he was writing this stuff, to sort of keep it more like the cartoon show, where you had everybody sort of involved all the time. Of course, Rob's story may have been that's the thing. You get. I don't know what Dan DiDio had particularly wanted in Future Quest Presents, so that it may be that Dan wanted him to develop some of the other characters or things like that, rather than just to have a big Herculoids family adventure kind of thing. I really don't know. But I got to do a lot of design stuff and, the villain and everything. And I purposely went in and I can't tell you why now, but I just kind of felt like this should be a Kirby looking kind of villain. And that's why I gave him the old kind of headdress and sort of the face, the way it was and things like that was all sort of kind of Kirby throwback.
I wondered about that because there is like a very serious Kirby vibe there.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going for. Now, why I would tie that into Hanna-Barbera, I'm not really sure, but I just...
Well, Kirby did work for Hanna-Barbera for a short time.
Well, there you go. Maybe that was a connection or something. But I don't know. When I read the script, it just kind of felt, I was like, this guy, I should do like because I guess maybe when I think of 60s, we think of Kirby, right? And so, and the show, of course, originated in the 60s. So I just felt like, I'm going to do kind of a Kirby-esque kind of design on this villain, and for better or for worse. So that's what I ended up doing.
I got a very interesting sense of, like, I saw the Kirby. I wondered if maybe Dorno as a god was maybe a little Ditko influenced, a little Captain University. But there was also this very, like you said, sword and sorcery kind of 70s feel to a lot of like the characters and the environments, and it all blended really well. Like nothing seemed like it didn't fit. So success.
Well, it's all that stuff gets filtered through me, so it may be coming from different directions, but it's all coming out of me. So you hope that that's kind of what gives it that continuity in the end, because I'm not someone, I don't pull out some reference and put it up on my drawing table and then, sort of try to emulate it. What I'll do is I'll go and look at something, close the book, and then go back to my drafting table. So I have sort of a fresh memory of it, but it's not 100% clear. And then that way it allows me to filter that stuff through me without directly copying somebody else's stuff. And so it's kind of like, I want to give this a Kirby vibe, or I want to give this a Ditko Doctor Strange vibe. And you do it by looking at the stuff and then closing the book and putting it away and saying, okay, it's sort of in my consciousness now. And then it's going to get remixed and come out, but you can see the influence without it being a direct, a rip-off. And you start doing stuff like that, then you sort of have like, oh, that's a Kirby page, that's a Ditko page, and it kind of has this weird sort of mismatch, or it can. So that's kind of my approach when I'm doing that kind of stuff. And I did use some Ditko stuff, but I used it originally I had this weird sequence at the beginning of my Metamorpho miniseries, and it was all, sort of Ditko influenced Doctor Strange stuff. So I still had that kind of floating around in the back of my mind, when I was doing the Herculoids stuff.
Fair enough. Did you have much communication with the writers, or did you work pretty much straight from script?
Yeah, I mean, Parker's here in the Portland area, but when I get a script, generally, unless I have a question, I just do it. And it depends on the project. On these particular ones, though, it was just, here's the script, do it. I wasn't put in a situation where I was like, I don't really understand what's going on here, because I was very familiar with the material. So I had no reason to get in touch with the writers. If we're planning a project together, that's one thing, like I did with Robert Venditti when we were working on Damage. Those were all like conversations about what are we going to do here, what are we going to do here. But on something like this, when they go, oh, the script's been turned in and it's been approved, well, I read it, and if there's nothing confusing about it to me, I just go ahead and draw it.
Future Quest ran 12 issues, Future Quest Presents ran 12 issues, and then it was all over. I was crestfallen when it ended. There were so many stories yet to tell in this universe. Is there anything in that world you wish you had a chance to do that you didn't get to in the short time you were there?
Yeah, okay, I was really... I would have loved to have done more Herculoid stuff. I would have loved to just say, talk to Dan and say, hey, just turn the whole thing over to me. Let me write it and draw it. And I would still be doing it right now, But I wanted to do the last issue of Future Quest Presents was Frankenstein Jr. which was also like it's hard to say they were all my favorites, but if I had to rank them, Herculoids, Frankenstein Jr., Space Ghost, in that order, right? And so I really wanted to do that Frankenstein Jr. story. And I knew it was coming, but I was working on the Herculoids stuff, and I just kept letting time go by. And I finally got in touch with Joey Cavalieri, who was editing it. And I said, Joey, I got to do that Frankenstein Jr. story too. And he goes, literally, he goes, I just assigned that to somebody yesterday. And I was so ticked off because I'd been thinking about it. Ever since I started the Herculoids things, I knew they were going to do a Frankenstein Jr. story. But, I just kept putting it off and saying, I'll get in touch with Joey and tell him I want to do it, and I waited too long. And so somebody else had got to end up doing it. So that was a very sad day when I got that news, because that would have been, and then I could have at least said that I had worked on my two favorite characters or properties from the Hanna-Barbera collection. But, I got to do the Herculoids, so I can't complain too much.
The whole thing sort of just quietly faded away. Did you ever hear anything about like a third year or?
I know why it got canned, but I don't know if I'm at liberty to say.
Okay.
I will say this, that it was because it was tied up with the Looney Tunes stuff, and there was some issues with how DC represented the Looney Tunes characters in those mashups that they did, that apparently Warner Brothers wasn't too happy with how they handled the Looney Tunes characters, which I thought was brilliant. That Elmer Fudd Batman thing, and I got to do the Marvin Martian Manhunter. But that was the rumor that I heard, that kind of Warner Brothers got a little upset about that.
Yeah, I'd heard it was Hanna-Barbera not liking how the Hanna-Barbera characters were represented, but...
See, I guess it depends on who you talk to, because I don't know. The Hanna-Barbera stuff was represented like it was in the cartoon show, so I don't know what problem they would have possibly had with that.
Well, there were books like Rough and Ready, which I thought was a really entertaining book, but I mean, it was a Howard Chaykin book, so...
Rough and Ready. I mean, I don't even... That doesn't even ring a bell. What was that?
Rough and Ready was the first Hanna-Barbera cartoon, and Howard Chaykin came in and did a 6-issue miniseries where he treated Rough and Ready like an old vaudeville comedy group. And
didn't see that.
It's a cat and a dog, and I mean, it's raunchy, and it's politically incorrect. It's very Howard Chaykin.
Well, I guess the Flintstones too was very, which I thought was actually a pretty good comic.
Oh, it was brilliant.
But yeah, that kind of went off the beaten path too. And was Snagglepuss part of that too? I know that went way off the.
Yeah, Snagglepuss came after Flintstones. That was Mark Russell's. And everything I've heard from everyone who's worked on the properties, they said Hanna-Barbera was like, as long as they didn't do anything that got him sued, like, go crazy, have fun. So maybe it was the Looney Tunes that kind of hung him out to dry.
That's what I had heard. But like I said, apparently the problem is anytime you license something, even if it's something that no one cares about and no one's using, they get. And I guess I can understand why from a branding standpoint, but they always get really uptight if you stray, even if you do it in a brilliant way, from what the designs are and what the characters are supposed to represent. I mean, they would rather have those things buried in a vault and never used rather than have them used outside of how they want them used. You know what I mean? And that's kind of unfortunate, but at the same time, I can kind of understand it, because animation, the movies and the animation are completely different than what you can do and what you can get away with in comics. I sort of, from just a fan standpoint, I really liked what they did with the Looney Tunes characters. And I think Dan probably felt that was the only way that those books would sell, is if he somehow incorporated them into the DCU. And I just thought that was brilliant,
I agree.
But I can see how, Warner Brothers would, or Hanna-Barbera, whoever was, could say, well, this isn't like the cartoon, this is, you can't do this. And so even though I think you're looking at probably two completely different audiences, right? I mean, the people that read the comics are people that watch the cartoon show, but they're also people that read comics, so they sort of get it. But if you have just people that only watch the cartoon show and then they pick up a comic book by happenstance and it's not the same thing, then they're kind of like scratching their head going, I don't get this. What is this? I don't understand. So, but since they're not using them as animated properties, what the heck?
Yeah.
But apparently it bothered them enough to pull the plug on it. So, but I'm sure sales had something to do with it as well. The sales always have something to do with it.
I keep talking about this all day, but I want to talk about Garbage Man, your new project that's coming out before our time is up here. What can you tell us about Garbage Man?
Well, Garbage Man was a miniseries, a couple of miniseries I did for DC as a creator-owned book like 10 years ago. And it was the long and short of it is that when I had first come over to DC from Marvel, I had talked to Dan DiDio about doing some writing, and he didn't, he was like, I don't care, sure. And we started talking, and Swamp Thing at that time was under the control of Vertigo, and Dan wanted like a monster book, a Hulk character, a Swamp Thing type character, something like that in the DCU. And as absurd as it sounds, he couldn't get it back from Vertigo. They wouldn't give it up. So we started talking about it, and he's like, I really need, a monster book to replace Swamp Thing. And I said, okay, let me, as a Swamp Thing, at least a Wrightson Swamp Thing, the original run. I never really got into the Alan Moore stuff, but the Len Wein stuff and the Bernie Wrightson stuff and the Redondo stuff after that, I was a big fan of. So I tried to create a character that was similar in feel to Swamp Thing without being Swamp Thing, right? It had to have enough, obviously, different physical attributes and character attributes that would make it different, which is, what I did. But it was one of those things that you look at and it felt familiar, so that it wouldn't be a shock to anybody's system. They'd go, oh, hey, this is, just like Swamp Thing. Let's check it out. So originally it was going to be its own series. And then it was going to be a mini series. And then it was going to be a backup in the Batman issues, which would have been great because it would have got great exposure. But then it ended up being part of an anthology, which, is always the kiss of death in comics for some reason. Anthologies people just don't buy. And so it was very obscure. I mean, there's 120 pages worth of material, and they never traded it. So here we are 10 years later, they finally gave the rights back to me because they got Swamp Thing back from Vertigo, so they didn't need Garbage Man anymore. So now that I've got all the files and everything back, I wanted to collect it all. And it's some of the best artwork I've ever done. It may be the best artwork I've ever done in comics. And so I really wanted to get it collected in kind of a nice edition. And so I put it up on Indiegogo. There's a pre-launch page there now. You can search. You just go to Indiegogo and type in Garbage Man, and it'll come up. But I'm hoping to launch it in the next week or so, launch the fundraising campaign. But what it's going to be is it's going to be the entire DC collection. There's going to be some sketchbook material, design stuff that I originally did. It hasn't been published. And then a brand new Garbage Man story will be in there as well. And I'll be writing and drawing it. Matt Ryan will be inking, because he inked the original Garbage Man stuff. He's been inking me for years. And I got John Cleese, who's going to be coloring, and he colored the second Garbage Man miniseries. So it's kind of like getting the whole gang back together, of course, if we can get it funded. And so it'll end up being, it's going to be a European-sized hardcover that, like 9 1/4 by 12, something like that, on nice paper, of course. And it's going to be a hardcover, and it'll be about, when it's all said and done, about a 170-page book. So it's a big book. There's going to be a standard edition. There's going to be a PDF, a downloadable version, and there's going to be a collector's, more expensive collector's version in there. And we'll see, see if I can get enough publicity out there to get people actually to go and buy it. But there was about between, depending on the issue, there's about between 15 and 19,000 was the circulation on those anthologies when I originally did it. So there's that many people out there that are familiar with the character, or have at least seen it, And so you hope that you can pull enough of those people out, and maybe some new readers to come in and be attracted to buying the project.
So are you promoting it on your YouTube channel?
Yeah, I've got the promo video running on my YouTube channel. Almost all the artwork I'm doing, because most of my YouTube videos are instructional videos. or process videos, however you want to refer to them. And almost all of them are me working on Garbage Man art. So I promo it that way. I've got the promotional video for the book up on my YouTube channel as well as on the Indiegogo site. And then, of course, I'm constantly mentioning it on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, which I have presence on all three of those. So doing what I can to get the word out and coming on your show and talking about Hanna-Barbera and then slipping in the Garbage Man at the end.
And where can people find you on the other social media? Like, what's your handle?
Oh, what's my handle? That's well,
or if they just search Aaron Lopresti, they should be able to.
I mean, if you go to Aaron Lopresti on Facebook, it'll come up. Instagram, I want to say I know at Twitter I'm at Aaron Lopresti, so that's pretty easy. Instagram is something like that. I think it's just Aaron Lopresti. I think if you run it together as a single word, because there's not a lot of Aaron Loprestis on social media. So, I mean, there's a couple, but none of them that are artists except me. So they're pretty easy to find. And my YouTube channel, of course, it's got some big old long whatever address, but it's just, if you just go on YouTube and type in Aaron Lopresti, it'll come up, and there's links to all my social media on my videos.
Fair enough.
So everything's, if you can find one of them, you can find all the other ones because they're all sort of linked together at some point.
I'll track them down and throw them all in the show notes.
Oh, great. Thank you.
That'll probably be easier.
People always ask me that stuff, and it's like second nature to know that stuff, and yet I don't.
Yeah, I don't know all of my accounts either.
Yeah, it's like, I know my name, my website is aaronlopresti.com, I know that. But these, Twitter handles and all that kind of, I don't even pay attention to whatever it was when I signed up,
We're pretty much out of time, but I wish we could talk more about Garbage Man. I would almost suggest, I just listened to your conversation with Art T-Bear on his channel.
Yes.
On the Hacks Chat, where you guys talk extensively about this stuff. I might even link to that as well for anybody who's interested, because I think you guys talk for like 2 hours. There's some good stories about the industry, and then there's just a whole bunch of Garbage Man. There's images, there's all that stuff. So.
That's a good idea.
All right, so everybody go check that out. Go hunt down these Future Quest Herculoid stories if you haven't seen them already. They're great. They're beautiful to look at, and they're fun to read. Go check out Garbage Man. Check out Aaron's Indiegogo and his social media. And Aaron, thank you so much for giving of your time and coming on the show. This has been fun. I wish we had more time.
Great. Thank you very much for having me and doing this. It's terrific. I appreciate it.
And there you have it. That was my conversation with Future Quest and Future Quest Presents artist Aaron Lopresti. I want to thank Aaron for coming on the show and chatting comics and Hanna-Barbera characters with me. It's always a pleasure to be able to have these chats with these writers and these artists, these creators of this stuff that we enjoy reading and watching and consuming, and being able to find out a little bit about the behind-the-scenes process and politics and all that jazz. I hope you enjoyed that and got a little something out of it. And if you want to check out Aaron's work, as I said at the top of the show, he's done a lot of work for a lot of different publishers. Check out his DC Hanna-Barbera work on the Future Quest and Future Quest Presents. Check out his Wonder Woman work for DC. Just work your way back. Work your way back to the early 90s and that sludge work. Aaron's a great artist. I love his work. I've loved it for years. I'm sure if you haven't already, once you start digging through it, you will too. Also want to give another shout out to Aaron's Indiegogo campaign. The campaign, of course, is to support his Garbage Man project, and the address for that is indiegogo.com/projects/garbage-man. He's still got some dollars to raise on that to get that hardcover and all that material out. There's some interesting reward levels, and there's a new story that he's also put together to add to the previous Garbage Man material. The stuff looks great, and you can see more on Aaron's YouTube channel. If you just search Aaron Lopresti on YouTube, you will find it. That's AARON LOPRESTI. You can also check out Aaron on Twitter, where he is at Aaron Lopresti. And if you're really curious about the Garbage Man, beyond that, you can also check out, I'm going to promote somebody else's YouTube channel here that has nothing to do with my podcast or Aaron, but Art T. Bear, who is also an artist who's been working for many, many years on many, many different titles for Marvel and DC. He has a YouTube channel as well. One of the series that he does is called Hacks Chat, where he converses with different people in the industry. He did chat with Aaron, lasted a couple of hours. Lots of artwork was shown, lots of good industry kind of behind the scenes stories and chats were told. Definitely worth checking out if you are interested in Aaron's work or even just comics in general. And I'm going to have the links to that in the show notes, so everybody can just kind of go there and check that out and click through and do all the things. And so support Aaron, and if you want to support my show, if you stream or download off of iTunes, rate and review the show while you're there. 5 stars always preferable, but go with your heart. Vote what you feel. I'll pander for votes and reviews, but I'm not going to tell you how to vote or review. It just helps get the podcast into the eyes and ears of people with the algorithms, people who might be interested in the show but don't know about it. And word of mouth is also a great way to spread the gospel of a podcast named Scooby-Doo on your social media. When I'm posting episodes on my Twitter or Facebook, like and share them, retweet them, spread it around, and other people will get to see them. So it's very helpful. It's very grassroots, very low impact. And there's also the blog, which is scoobydoocast.wordpress.com, which you can check out. And I'm currently in the process of working on some ideas to get some more content generated for that. Also, while I'm talking about the blog, Aaron, like all of the other DC Hanna-Barbera creators, has graciously donated some behind-the-scenes process work, some stuff that you would not normally have gotten a chance to see regarding his Herculoids work, and I'm going to be posting that as the sort of APNSD extra for my DC Hanna-Barbera conversations for Aaron, so I will also link to that in the show notes, and be sure to go and check that out when you're done listening to the interview, if you're curious. I'm not going to force anybody to do anything they don't want to do. If you're as curious as me, as thirsty for behind-the-scenes stuff as me, well, if you were, you'd probably be doing your own podcast. But if you're slightly less so than me, this is the way to go. Also, like I said at the top of the show, there's going to be another interview coming. I'm not going to make you guys wait too long. It's going to be maybe a week, 2 at most. And that interview is going to be with What's New Scooby-Doo writer Jordana Arkin. She wrote an episode in Season 2, and she wrote an episode in Season 3. We had a great talk. About working at that time on that show. She's the first creator that I'm going to have on from What's New Scooby-Doo, so that's really cool. And I've got another big interview, which some of you have already sussed out who and what it is, coming up after Jordana. Jordana's going to be a couple of parts, and the next one is going to be, I'm guessing, maybe 3. It's a big one. It's a really big one. But I'm also, I'm trying to flood as much content as I can in the time that I have before year's end, partially to celebrate Scooby and partially just to make up for time lost. I've also got a project which I'm working on, which is kind of a special project, which hopefully you guys will think is cool. I'm not going to say anything about it until I have more of it put together. That should be coming up before the end of the year. If all goes well, it should be super cool, and will be stuff to listen to, content for the podcast. So that will be also very cool. Anyways, thank you guys so much for joining me. Thank you for supporting the podcast. As always, couldn't do this. It would be super boring to do this without you guys out there. Feel free to let me know what you think of the episode and the show and the podcast and anything in general on the social medias. Find me on Facebook. Find me on Twitter at ScoobyDooCast, Instagram, WordPress, as I mentioned. And if you need to send me an email, scoobypodcast@gmail.com is the address there. It's great having you here for the conversation, and that is it for me. I am out. You guys take care, and remember...
It's too late now. They've surrounded